Thanks for being with us. I'm Bill O'Reilly. In the Miller Time segment tonight, when the D-Man and I are on the road for the Boulder Fresher shows, we talk about a lot of stuff backstage. And one name that came up very often was Robin Williams. Miller was a good friend to him, and in every conversation we had, he had great things to say about Mr. Williams. And I was very impressed with what he said. And joining us now from Santa Barbara is the sage of Southern California, who's addressed a suicide on his syndicated radio program this week. First of all, I'm sorry about your friend. I lost a very close friend in a helicopter crash. I kind of know what that is a little bit. But I think what I'd like to know, I think the folks too, is what should we know most about Robin Williams?
Well, it was right before we went on here and you and I were talking. You said, I'm sorry about the loss of your friend Dennis. And you said, you've never called me Dennis. And that's the beauty of Robin. I think everybody's so sort of pilty and wiped out at his loss that, he was an immense intellect. He was a fearless comedian. And all that was dwarfed by an even bigger heart. I mean, he was the sweetest, gentlest cat that I encountered in my life. And I remember thinking yesterday, as I thought about Robin, I don't think anybody's ever saw more smiles reflected back at him in the history of their life. He had a magical quality about him. I'd watch from the side of the stage once in a while, and it was like you were watching a comedian. You saw big laughs, but you saw wonderment, too. You saw those crowds at the end of Redford's quiz show where people couldn't believe Charles Van Doren knew that. They couldn't believe Robin was tapped into that sort of wire, and they wanted to be part of it, and that was one of his brilliant things. Is I always thought Robin was like a genius with a sidecar. There are some geniuses I've talked to in my life or saw, and man, it was inaccessible. You knew that they were on their own. I always felt with the people with Robin, ever since he did that first bit on his first HBO special, Step Inside My Brain, I always felt they were along for the ride. People would float out of that room. Like all of a sudden they were on the existential tour for the night with the most existential tour guide in the history of the planet. And guess what? He didn't want to be left alone. He was, he wanted them to be privy to him. He was a brilliant diffuser of fame. When people would see him on the street, it was like they were seeing a fictional character. And there was minimal lag time between him watching their jaws drop to him picking their jaws up and forming them into a smile, where all of a sudden he'd be saying, hey, boss, what? And he'd talk to them, and I'm telling you, these people would walk away on air. I always thought that it was an interesting poker tell that his genius was like this barely tethered stream of consciousness, very loosely harnessed, and he was riding around at a high clip of speed, mouth barely in front of the synaptic posse, and yet he never defaulted to malevolent. It was always, going that fast. Really, can you think about a time where Robin just gacked it and everybody's like, oh, that's too mean?
Right.
Never. At the core, his default set was gentle,
right,
and his unconscious was sweet. And I haven't met a lot of people like that, where when they're tired, when they're run down, when they're overworked, they default back to sweet. That always touched me about Robin Williams.
Now, you talk with him on the phone. I mean, I remember one show we did that I think you had just come off the phone with him. So you guys were commiserating. What was that about? I mean, was it professional, or were you checking in with him, or what was that?
I just check in periodically. He was always very sweet. He seemed to know when you had done something. I was always touched by that, and he would call you and just say he'd seen you somewhere. He had such great manners, Billy. I don't know, when Robin was a kid, he always told me that he played alone, and he played with toy soldiers. And when I heard that he had passed this week, I remember thinking, I guess the toy soldiers of the world just lost their best general, and the world at large has lost a friend, and a man who impacted it in that you could feel his joyful presence in the world. As far as a comedian goes, those synapses were unmatched. That guy was like that particle accelerator at the University of Chicago.
Only Jonathan Winters was close, and he lived near you, Mr. Winters, and he was, only one. Last question. Were you shocked about when you heard it? Did this knock you off your feet?
Well, listen, the death of an indelible character always does, and I need to know more. I don't need to know it now, though. I'm just in mourning. He was one of the dearest men who ever lived, and I The only thing I could say is, if Robin Williams, who was a locus of joy, can get to that dark place, any of the billions of people on this planet can. And if you're ever in that corner, you have to round the corner off by getting hold of another human being. You know how quickly life can flip. You know 2 days later the sun can be out. It's that moment.
Yeah.
And if he could get to it, anybody could get to it. And if you want to serve his memory, never not make the call to somebody. Never.
All right, it's good advice, Millith, and we appreciate it very much. Just a gentle reminder.